It was 3 in the morning when my world collapsed. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would wake the entire house as I stood paralyzed by the half-open door of Richard and Laura's room. The words I had just heard pierced me like icy daggers. "We're admitting her tomorrow. We've already signed the papers." My son-in-law's voice sounded casual, as if he were talking about the weather, while I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. For 70 years, I had faced loss, betrayal, and pain. But I never imagined that my own daughter would be the one to deliver the deepest wound. In that moment, with my legs trembling and my mouth dry, I knew I had to escape. I couldn't let them take me away like an old, useless object. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a second, and decided that this very night, my life would change forever. I didn't cry. I just tiptoed back to my room and began to plan my escape. But let me tell you how I got here. 6 months ago, when my beloved husband passed away after 45 years of marriage, Laura insisted I move in with her and Richard. "Mom, you can't stay alone in that big house," she would say with that smile I now recognize as false. "Here, you'll have company. We can take better care of you." Her words sounded sweet, full of filial concern, and I, devastated by the loss and feeling terribly alone, accepted without much thought. I sold some furniture, packed my most precious memories in boxes, and moved into their modern home on the outskirts of the city. The house was beautiful, with white walls, a manicured garden, and a gleaming kitchen that smelled of expensive cleaning products. But from the first day, something felt strange. Richard greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and when I hugged my granddaughter Claire, who is 16, I noticed she avoided my gaze. The first few days passed in a seemingly normal routine. Laura had set up the guest room for me with cream-colored curtains and a comfortable bed. Every morning we had breakfast together, coffee, toast with butter, while Richard read the news on his phone and Claire got ready for school. I tried to join the conversations, asking about Richard's work at the insurance company or about Claire's favorite subjects. But there were strange silences, glances exchanged between Richard and Laura when they thought I wasn't looking. The house had a tense atmosphere, as if everyone was acting in a poorly rehearsed play. Laura cooked my favorite dishes, but when I offered to help, she always said, "No, Mom, you rest. We'll take care of it." Richard would bring flowers on Fridays and ask if I needed anything from the pharmacy, but his gestures felt mechanical, without real warmth. It was during the 3rd week that I began to notice the signs I should have seen from the beginning. Richard had started organizing my medications in a weekly pill box. "This way you won't forget to take them, Helen," he would tell me in that condescending voice you use with small children. When I protested, saying I had always managed my medications perfectly, Laura intervened. "Mom, it's for your own good." Sometimes seniors get confused with the doses. The word seniors echoed in my head like an alarm bell. I also noticed that Richard had started checking my mail before giving it to me. "I'm just making sure it's not annoying junk mail," he would explain. But I saw how his eyes scanned each envelope carefully. My bank statements would arrive opened, and when I asked, Laura told me it must have been a mistake by the mailman. But I knew something was wrong. My instincts, as a woman who had raised 5 children and survived decades of marriage, were screaming at me that I was being manipulated. The last straw was when I discovered that Richard had changed the house's Wi-Fi password. When I tried to connect my phone to video call my old friends, I couldn't get access. "The router must be broken, Mom," Laura lied without even looking me in the eye. "Richard will fix it this weekend." But the weekend passed, and another, and I still couldn't use the internet. I began to feel like a prisoner in the house that was supposed to be my refuge. My friends stopped calling because I wasn't answering their messages, and when I asked to use the house phone to contact them, there was always an excuse. "The line is busy, better after dinner. We don't want to bother the neighbors." Slowly, I realized they were isolating me from the outside world, cutting my connections one by one like someone snipping the strings of a puppet. That night that changed everything began like any other. We had roast chicken with vegetables for dinner, and Richard had been particularly attentive, pouring my water and asking if the food was to my liking. Claire had talked about a history project at school, and for a moment, the table felt like a real home. But I had already learned to read the silent glances between Richard and Laura, those quick exchanges that spoke a language I didn't understand. After dinner, I went to my room early, pretending to be tired. In reality, I had started to listen. For the past few weeks, I had noticed that the family's important conversations happened after I went to bed, as if my presence were an obstacle to their real discussions. From my bed, I could hear fragments of conversation coming from the living room. Richard was on the phone with someone, but his voice was too low to make out the words. I got up stealthily and walked to my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, barely lit by the light filtering in from the main living area. I could hear better as I got closer, walking barefoot on the cold tiles. Richard was on the sofa, his back to me, the phone pressed to his ear. His voice sounded relaxed, even satisfied. "No, Mom, everything is ready. We're going early tomorrow. We've already signed all the necessary papers." I felt as if I had been punched in the stomach. Papers? What papers? My mind started racing, trying to understand what he was talking about. Richard's voice continued, clearer now because he had leaned back on the sofa and was speaking towards the ceiling. "The place is perfect, Mom. It has gardens, nurses, 24 hours a day, and it's only 30 minutes from here. Laura can visit her on weekends if she wants." My heart stopped. He was talking about me. He was talking about putting me in some place. Yes, I already spoke with Dr. Evans. He signed the medical documents we needed. He says that at her age, it's normal for her to need specialized care. The words hit me one after another like hammer blows. Dr. Evans was my primary care physician, a man I had trusted for years. How was it possible that he had signed something without consulting me? My legs began to tremble, but I couldn't move. I needed to hear more. "Don't worry about the money, Mom. With her pension and the savings she has, we can cover the facility's expenses for years. Besides, I've already looked into selling her old house. The old house. My house. The house where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised my children, where my husband had died in my arms." Richard was talking about selling it as if it were his, as if I were already dead. "Diane, please, don't scold me. You know this is for the best. She can't take care of herself anymore, and we can't look after her as she deserves." A lie. I could cook, clean, manage my medications, and had been doing so perfectly until I arrived at this house. The only reason I seemed confused was because they controlled every aspect of my life. Richard continued talking to his mother, Diane, revealing details that chilled my blood. Laura was worried at first, but I explained to her that it's the only way to secure Claire's future. College costs more than $20,000 a year, and with Helen's pension, we can pay for it without any problems. Plus, if we sell the house, we'll have enough for a down payment on a bigger house for ourselves. There it was, the naked and cruel truth. They didn't want to put me in a home because I was sick or because they couldn't take care of me. They wanted me out of the way so they could take over my money and my property. My own daughter had signed papers to get rid of me as if I were an old piece of furniture cluttering up the living room. The transport from the assisted living facility is coming at 8 tomorrow. We told her it was for a medical evaluation, so she won't suspect anything until it's too late. Richard laughed, a cold laugh that turned my stomach. By the time she realizes what's happening, she'll already be registered as a permanent resident. The doctor says that with her age and emotional state after her husband's death, it's easy to justify the admission. Every word was a slap in the face. They had planned every detail of my legal kidnapping with the precision of experienced criminals. And the most painful part of all was that my own daughter, the child I had carried in my womb, whom I had taught to walk and had comforted during her nightmares, was an accomplice to this betrayal. "Yes, Mom. Laura has already packed all her important things in boxes. Tomorrow, after they take her, we'll change the locks and start clearing out the room." The room, that was my room. My family photos, my books, the blanket my mother had knitted, everything would be packed up and thrown away like trash. No, I don't think Claire will be a problem. She's a teenager. She's more worried about her friends than her grandmother. Besides, we told her the facility has a pool and recreational activities, that her grandmother will be better off there. But I knew Claire loved me. I had seen the pain in her eyes these last few weeks, as if she sensed something bad was happening, but didn't know what. Finally, Richard said goodbye to his mother. "Perfect, Mom. By this time tomorrow, it will all be over. Helen will be in her new home, and we can start living our lives without this burden." That word, burden. echoed in my ears like a scream. I had been called many things in my life: wife, mother, teacher, friend, but never a burden. Richard hung up the phone and headed to the kitchen. I ran back to my room as silently as I could, my heart beating so loud I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. I sat on the bed, trembling, trying to process what I had just discovered. In less than 5 hours, a transport would come to take me to a place where I would be locked up against my will, while my own family took over everything I had worked for during 70 years of my life. I sat on the bed for several minutes, my mind racing a mile a minute, while my heart slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The bedside clock read 3:15 in the morning. I had less than 5 hours before that transport arrived. 5 hours to decide whether I would remain a helpless victim or take control of my destiny. The Helen who had raised 5 children while working as a teacher, who had cared for her sick husband for 2 years without ever complaining, who had faced poverty and hardship with her chin up, that woman would not give up without a fight. I got out of bed with a determination I hadn't felt in months. The first thing I did was mentally review everything I had heard. Richard had mentioned that they had already signed papers, that Dr. Evans had provided medical documents, and that a transport would come at 8. They had also packed my things, which meant they didn't expect me to ever come back. But there was something they hadn't considered. I was still the owner of my bank account, my house, and all my properties. As long as I had my ID card and a clear mind, I had legal power. The problem was that once I was locked in that assisted living facility, it would be much harder to prove my mental competence. I walked to my dresser and took out a small suitcase I had stored in the back of the closet. With trembling but determined hands, I began to pack only the essentials: underwear, 2 changes of clothes, my medications, my most important documents which I kept in a folder, and the $500 in cash I always kept for emergencies. I also took the jewelry my husband had given me during our marriage, my wedding ring, the pearl earrings he gave me on our 20th anniversary, and the gold necklace that had belonged to my mother. These pieces had both sentimental and economic value, and could be useful if I needed money. As I packed, my mind worked on a plan. I couldn't leave through the front door because there was an alarm that was activated at night. Richard had explained on the first day that it was for security, but now I understood it was another way to control me. However, my bedroom window faced the side yard, and I remembered noticing when I arrived that the latch was a bit loose. It was a low window, less than 3 feet from the ground, perfectly feasible for a woman my age who was still in good physical shape. The question was, where to go once I was out? I remembered my old neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who lived about 10 blocks from Laura's house. We had been friends for years, and I knew she was a discreet and reliable woman. Her house was close enough to walk to, but far enough that Richard and Laura wouldn't think to look for me there immediately. Mrs. Gable had always told me that her door was open to me, no matter the hour. I hoped that promise was still valid at 4 in the morning. I finished packing and dressed in comfortable clothes, dark pants, a long-sleeved blouse, and my quietest shoes. I double-checked that I had all my documents: ID, credit cards, savings, passbook, and a piece of paper where I had written down important phone numbers, including that of my lawyer, Oscar Morales, who had handled my and my husband's legal affairs for years. Oscar was an honest and competent man, and if anyone could help me protect my rights, it was him. Before opening the window, I peeked out carefully to check the yard. The house was completely silent, and the neighbors' lights were off. The moon provided enough light to see the path to the side gate that led to the street. Richard had once mentioned that they never locked that gate because they only used it to take out the trash. With any luck, I could get out that way without making a noise. I opened the window slowly, inch by inch, praying it wouldn't creak. The latch was indeed loose, and the window slid open smoothly. The cool morning air hit my face, bringing with it the scent of the jasmine Laura had planted near the window. How ironic that the flowers my daughter had chosen to beautify her home would witness my escape from her betrayal. I placed the suitcase on the ground in the yard and then slid through the window with more agility than I'd had in years. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins like a raging river. Once outside, I took my suitcase and walked close to the wall of the house, avoiding the gravel areas that might make noise under my feet. The yard was well kept, with soft grass that absorbed the sound of my steps. I reached the side gate, and it was indeed unlocked. I pushed it just enough to slip through, and in seconds, I was on the street. The street was deserted and silent, lit only by the streetlights that cast yellowish circles of light every 50 yards. I began to walk at a steady but not too fast pace, so as not to draw attention if someone saw me from a window. As I walked, I felt a strange mix of fear and liberation. For the first time in months, I was making my own decisions, walking where I wanted to go, without anyone telling me what to do or not to do. The way to Mrs. Gable's house was familiar because we had walked that route together many times when she came to visit me or when I went for tea at her house. 10 blocks didn't seem like much in a car, but on foot, carrying a suitcase and at 70 years old, it felt like a marathon. However, every step I took moved me further away from the nightmare my life had become at Laura's house and closer to the possibility of reclaiming my freedom. When I reached the 5th block, I had to stop for a moment to rest. I sat on the edge of a public planter, trying to catch my breath. It was then that the reality of what I was doing hit me completely. A 70-year-old woman, escaping in the middle of the night from her own daughter's house because she had discovered a plan to have her institutionalized against her will. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I wouldn't have believed it. But there I was, living the nightmare that had become my reality. I arrived at Mrs. Gable's house when the nearby church clock struck 4:30 in the morning. Her windows were dark, as expected at that hour, but there was a small light on the porch that she always left on at night. I stood in front of her door for several seconds, hesitating whether it was right to wake my friend at this hour with a story that sounded like something out of a novel. But when I remembered Richard's words about the transport coming in less than 4 hours, I knew I had no alternative. I knocked on the door softly, 3 short taps, waited a moment, and knocked again. I heard shuffling steps from inside and Mrs. Gable's sleepy voice asking, "Who is it?" "It's me, Mrs. Gable, Helen," I answered in a low but clear voice. There was a silence, followed by the sound of several locks being undone. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Gable in her robe, her hair disheveled and her eyes puffy with sleep, but her expression immediately changed from confusion to concern when she saw me there with my suitcase. "My God, Helen, what happened? Are you all right?" she asked as she quickly ushered me inside and closed the door behind me. I collapsed on her sofa, and for the first time all night, the tears began to flow. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief and of a rage that I had been suppressing for months. Mrs. Gable sat next to me, put her arm around my shoulders, and let me cry without asking any questions. When I could finally speak, I told her everything the conversation I had overheard, the plan to have me institutionalized, the manipulation with my medications, the isolation, and the betrayal of my own daughter. Mrs. Gable listened in silence, but I saw her expression harden with every detail I revealed. "Those monsters," she muttered when I finished my story. "I always knew I didn't like that Richard. There was something in his eyes I didn't trust." Mrs. Gable had met Richard on several occasions when he visited my old house, and I remembered she had once commented that he seemed overly interested in the details of my finances. "And Laura, Helen, I thought that girl loved you. How could she do this?" The disappointment in her voice mirrored my own pain. Laura had been an exemplary daughter for years, but now I understood that maybe she had just been waiting for the right moment to show her true nature. Mrs. Gable made me some chamomile tea and offered me her guest room. "You can stay here as long as you need," she told me firmly, "but you have to call a lawyer immediately. What they're doing is kidnapping and fraud. There are laws that protect seniors from this kind of abuse." She was right. I knew Oscar Morales was my best option, but I would have to wait until his office opened to contact him. In the meantime, I needed to think about all the steps I had to take to protect myself. When the first light of dawn began to filter through Mrs. Gable's windows, I had already slept for a couple of hours and had a clear plan in mind. First, I would call Oscar to tell him the situation and ask him to take immediate legal action. Second, I would go to the bank to make sure no one else had access to my accounts. Third, I would contact Dr. Evans to confront him about the documents he had signed without my knowledge. And fourth, I needed to gather evidence of everything that had happened at Laura's house. At 7 in the morning, Mrs. Gable and I were having breakfast when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something told me it was related to me. "Should I answer?" Mrs. Gable asked. I nodded, curious to know who could be calling. Mrs. Gable answered with a simple hello and then handed me the phone. "It's for you," she said with a strange expression. It was Claire, my granddaughter, and her voice sounded distraught and confused. "Grandma, where are you? Dad and Mom are desperate. They say you disappeared during the night and that you're sick and confused. Some men in an ambulance came to take you to the doctor, but when they went to your room, you weren't there." My heart raced. Richard and Laura had discovered my escape and were already executing their contingency plan, painting me as a confused old woman who had wandered off in the night. "Claire, my love, listen to me very carefully," I told her, in the calmest voice I could manage. "I'm not sick or confused. I am perfectly fine and in a safe place. But I need you to know something very important about your parents." Claire was silent, and I could hear voices in the background, probably Richard and Laura arguing about what to do. "I can't talk for long now, but soon you'll understand everything. The only thing you need to know is that I love you, that you will always be my favorite granddaughter, and that nothing you're going to hear about me in the coming days is true." "Grandma, I don't understand anything. Dad says you got up sleepwalking last night and left the house without remembering where you were going. He says it's normal for people your age, and that's why you need specialized medical attention." Claire's voice was breaking, and I could hear the fear and confusion in her words. Richard had already started manipulating her, using the sleepwalking story to explain my absence and justify the need to have me institutionalized. "Claire, do you remember when you were little and we used to play detectives? I'm going to ask you to use those skills now. Observe everything your parents say and do. See if their stories make sense. And above all, remember that your grandmother who taught you to read, who took you to the park every Sunday, who knows your birthday, your favorite color, and all your secrets, is not sick." Claire sobbed on the other end of the line. "I have to go, Grandma. Dad is coming this way." The line went dead, leaving me heartbroken, but also with a new determination. It was official. The war had begun. Richard and Laura would not only try to have me institutionalized when they found me, but they were also building a narrative where I was a senile old woman who was a danger to herself. But they had a weakness they hadn't considered. Claire, my granddaughter, was intelligent and sensitive, and although she was only 16, she had inherited my ability to see beyond pretty lies. If I could maintain a line of communication with her, I would have an ally inside enemy territory. At 8:30 in the morning, I was sitting in Oscar Morales' office. He had agreed to see me on an emergency basis after I explained the situation over the phone. Oscar was a man of 60, with gray hair and a piercing gaze that inspired confidence. He had handled my family's legal affairs for 15 years and knew my financial and mental situation perfectly. When I finished telling him everything that had happened, he leaned back in his chair with an expression of indignation that reassured me. This was not the first time he had seen a case like mine. "Helen, what they are doing constitutes several crimes," he told me as he took notes in a legal pad. "First, conspiracy to deprive you of your liberty. Second, attempted fraud to seize your assets. Third, forgery of medical documents if Dr. Evans indeed signed something without examining you. And fourth, elder abuse, which in this state carries very severe penalties." His words gave me hope, but also made me understand the seriousness of what I was facing. "The first thing we're going to do is get a temporary protection order to prevent them from having you institutionalized without your consent. Second, we're going to freeze all your bank accounts so no one else can access them. And third, we're going to officially document all of this." Oscar immediately called his assistant to prepare the necessary documents and then contacted a judge he knew to request an emergency hearing. "The legal system has specific protections for seniors in situations like yours," he explained as we waited. "But we need to act quickly before they can present their own version of the facts." He asked me to write a detailed statement of everything that had happened, including dates, specific conversations, and any evidence I could remember. While I was writing my statement, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I decided to answer, The voice I heard made my blood run cold. It was Richard, but he sounded completely different from the man who had been acting as the perfect son-in-law for months. His voice was cold, threatening, with no trace of the false courtesy he had used with me. "Helen, I know you're there. You need to come home immediately. You have serious health problems, and you need medical attention. If you don't come back of your own free will, we'll have to take more drastic measures." "Richard," I replied with a calm I didn't feel, "I am perfectly fine, and I have no intention of returning to that house. Besides, I now know exactly what your plans were for me." There was a silence on the other end of the line, and then Richard changed tactics. "I don't know what you're talking about, Helen. You got up confused last night and left the house. We were looking for you all night. Laura is hysterical with worry. How could you do this to your own daughter?" The manipulation in his voice was so obvious, it almost made me laugh. "I heard your conversation with your mother last night, Richard. I know all about the assisted living facility, about the papers you signed, about selling my house, about using my pension to pay for Claire's college. I know that Dr. Evans signed false documents. I know everything." This time the silence was longer, and when Richard spoke again, he had completely dropped the pretense of concern. "Listen to me carefully, you stupid old woman. Are you coming back to this house right now, or are you going to regret it? We have ways of making you look mentally incompetent, and when we're done with you, no one will believe a word you say." Oscar, who had been listening to the conversation, motioned for me to put it on speaker. "Richard," Oscar intervened in a professional voice. "This is Oscar Morales, Helen's attorney. This conversation is being recorded, and what you have just said constitutes a direct threat against my client. I suggest you consult with an attorney before making any further statements that could be used against you." Richard hung up immediately, but we had already gotten what we needed: recorded evidence of his true nature. "Perfect," Oscar said as he saved the recording on his phone. "This proves there is no real medical concern on his part. It's a clear threat to force her to return." Half an hour later, Oscar's assistant arrived with the temporary protection order documents, and we headed to the courthouse for the emergency hearing. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Wallace, listened to my case attentively and reviewed the recording of Richard's threat. "Mrs. Reed," the judge said after hearing all the evidence, "it is evident that you are in full possession of your mental faculties and that you have been the victim of an attempted abuse. I am issuing a temporary protection order that prohibits Richard Martinez, Laura Sandoval, and Diane Martinez from approaching or contacting you without your consent. I am also ordering an official investigation into the falsified medical documents and the attempted forced institutionalization." The sense of relief I felt at that moment was indescribable. We left the courthouse with official documents that legally protected me. But Oscar warned me that this was just the beginning. Now they will try to prove that you are mentally incompetent to manage your affairs. They will bring witnesses. They will get biased medical evaluations. They will do everything possible to reverse this order. He was right. Richard and Laura were not going to give up easily, especially now that they knew I was fighting back. Our next stop was the bank. When we arrived, we asked to speak with the manager, and I explained the situation. It turned out that Richard had tried to get information about my accounts the previous week, saying he was my son-in-law and needed to help manage my finances because I had been a little confused lately. Fortunately, the bank had strict privacy policies and had not given him any information. However, the manager showed me that there had been online access attempts to my account from an IP address that was not mine. I immediately changed all my passwords, added a security alert to all my accounts, and stipulated that only I could authorize any transaction over $100. I also transferred most of my money to a new account at a different bank, where Richard and Laura wouldn't know to look. "Your life savings amount to approximately $120,000, the manager explained as we processed the transfers. "With your monthly pension of $1,800, you have sufficient resources to live independently for many years." When we left the bank, I felt as if I had reclaimed an important part of my identity. For months, Richard had indirectly controlled my finances, suggesting expenses, reviewing my statements, making me feel like an economic burden. Now I had full control over my money again, and that gave me the power to make decisions about my future. Oscar took me back to Mrs. Gable's house, where we had lunch and planned our next steps. Mrs. Gable had been following local news online and had found something interesting. An article in the local paper about the rise in cases of financial abuse against seniors. "Look at this, Helen," she said, showing me her tablet. "It says there were over 500 reported cases in our county last year. Most involve family members trying to take over properties and savings of their elderly relatives." As we read the article, my phone rang again. This time it was Claire, but her voice sounded different, more cautious. "Grandma, can you talk? I'm at my friend Sophia's house." I told her yes, and Claire continued in a low voice. "Grandma, something weird is happening here. After we talked this morning, Dad and Mom have been making calls all day. I heard Dad talking to someone about getting a doctor who will say, 'You have Alzheimer's.' And Mom packed all your things in boxes and put them in the garage." My heart raced. Claire was starting to see the truth. "I also found something strange, Grandma. On Dad's desk, there are some papers with your name on them, and one says something about selling your house. But you never said you wanted to sell your house, did you?" Claire was connecting the dots, just as I had hoped she would. "My love," I told her gently, "I need you to be very brave and very smart. Your parents are not telling the truth about me or about the situation. Do you think you can take pictures of those papers without them noticing?" Claire was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "Yes, Grandma. I think I can do it. But I'm scared." "Claire, my brave girl," I said with all the tenderness I could convey over the phone. "I understand you're scared, but I need you to trust me like you always have. If you can get those photos, you would be helping to protect not just me, but you as well. Because if your parents can do this to me, their own mother, imagine what they could do to you when you turn 18 and have access to your college fund." Claire sighed on the other end of the line, and I could hear the weight of understanding falling on her young shoulders. "Grandma, is it true that Dad wanted to put you in a home to take your money?" Her voice broke a little as she asked the question. "Yes, my love. That's exactly what they wanted to do. Last night, I heard your dad on the phone with your grandmother Diane, planning everything. They were going to take me to a nursing home this morning, sell my house, and use my pension to pay for your college without asking me." Claire was silent for so long I thought she had hung up. Finally, she whispered, "But Mom always says she loves you so much. How can she be doing this?" It was the question I had asked myself 100 times since last night. "Sometimes the people we love can disappoint us in ways we never imagined," I answered. "Your mom may have convinced herself that this was for the best, but that doesn't make it right. Claire, do you remember when you were little and you asked me why adults sometimes do bad things? I told you that sometimes people get lost along the way and that money can make people change." Claire sobbed softly. "Yes, I remember. But I never thought my mom would get lost." I explained to Claire that she had to be very careful. "Don't confront your parents with what you know. Act normal, as if you don't know anything. If you can, take pictures of those documents and send them to me in a message. But above all, be safe. If at any point you feel you are in danger or need to get out of that house, call this number and ask for Oscar Morales." I dictated the lawyer's number and she wrote it down. He's my lawyer, and he already knows the whole situation. You can also call Mrs. Gable if you can't find me. Claire assured me she understood, and we agreed that she would contact me when it was safe to do so. After hanging up with Claire, Mrs. Gable and I sat down to plan my next move. "You can't stay hidden forever, Helen," Mrs. Gable told me as she boiled more tea. "Sooner or later, they will find you. And when they do, they will be prepared with a story about your supposed mental illness." She was right. I needed to be proactive, not reactive. "What do you suggest?" I asked her. Mrs. Gable smiled with an expression I hadn't seen in years. "I think it's time you did something Richard and Laura would never expect. Fight back." Mrs. Gable had a brilliant idea. Her niece worked at the local newspaper as a journalist, specializing in human interest stories and social issues. "Letitia has written several articles about elder abuse," Mrs. Gable explained. "If you tell her your story, she could write an article that exposes what Richard and Laura tried to do. Once the story is public, it will be much harder for them to continue with their lies." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. Making my story public meant there would be no going back. Mrs. Gable called her niece Letitia, who agreed to meet with us that same afternoon. While we waited, I received a text message from Claire with 3 photos. My heart raced when I saw the images. They were documents from Richard's desk, including a preliminary contract to sell my house, an application for power of attorney over my financial affairs, and, most shocking of all, a fake medical evaluation signed by Dr. Evans declaring that I suffered from significant cognitive impairment and loss of capacity for independent decision-making. I immediately sent the photos to Oscar, who called me 10 minutes later. "Helen, this is solid evidence of conspiracy and document forgery. Dr. Evans is in serious legal trouble. This evaluation is dated 2 weeks ago, but according to your medical records, you haven't visited his office in over 3 months." Oscar explained that with this evidence, we could not only defend ourselves, but also press criminal charges against Richard, Laura, and Dr. Evans. When Letitia arrived at Mrs. Gable's house that afternoon, I was surprised by her youth and energy. She was a woman of about 30, with curly hair and intelligent eyes that reminded me of Claire. Letitia took out a digital recorder and asked me to tell her the whole story from the beginning. For 2 hours, I recounted every detail. The move to Laura's house, the signs I had ignored, the conversation I overheard, my nighttime escape, and the evidence we had gathered. "Mrs. Reed," Letitia told me when I finished, "your story is exactly the kind of situation that needs to be exposed publicly, not only to protect you, but to warn other seniors about these tactics." Letitia explained that she had seen similar cases, but few with so much documented evidence. "The fact that you recorded Richard's threats and that your granddaughter photographed the false documents makes this story irrefutable." That night, as Letitia was writing the article, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First, it was Laura, her voice tearful and desperate. "Mom, please come home. I don't understand why you're doing this. We just want to take care of you." Her performance was so convincing that for a moment I doubted my own memory. But then I remembered the conversation I had overheard, the forged documents, and the coldness in Richard's voice when he threatened me. "Laura," I said with a calm that surprised me, "if you really wanted to take care of me, you wouldn't have signed papers to have me institutionalized without my consent. If you really loved me, you wouldn't have planned to sell my house behind my back. And if you really cared about my well-being, you wouldn't have allowed your husband to threaten me this morning." Laura was silent for a moment, then changed tactics. "Mom, I think you're confused. We never signed papers to have you institutionalized. We were just exploring options for when it might be necessary in the future. And about the house, Richard thought it would be better to sell it because it's too big for you alone." Her lies were so elaborate, I wondered how long she had been practicing them. "Laura, I have evidence of everything you're saying didn't happen. Documents, recordings, photos. So please, don't insult me by pretending I'm stupid." The conversation ended with Laura hanging up on me, but not before I heard her scream at someone in the background. "It's not working. She knows too much." 20 minutes later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Diane, Richard's mother, with a voice even more manipulative than her son's. "Helen, dear, it's Diane. Richard has told me about your confusion and your escape last night. I understand it must be very disorienting for you." "Diane," I interrupted, "there is no confusion on my part. I heard the conversation you had with your son last night, where you planned to have me institutionalized to take over my money, so you can save the theatrics." Diane was silent for a moment, then her voice changed completely, becoming hard and threatening. "Listen to me carefully, Helen. My son and my daughter-in-law have invested a lot of time and money in taking care of you. The least you can do is show some gratitude instead of causing trouble." "Gratitude?" I asked in disbelief. "Gratitude for planning to kidnap me and steal my life savings?" Diane laughed coldly. "Don't be dramatic. No one was going to kidnap you. We were just going to put you in a place where you could receive the care you need. And about the money, that money should belong to the family anyway. You've already lived your life." Her words revealed the mentality behind the whole plan. To them, I was no longer a person with rights, but an obstacle to their financial ambitions. "Diane," I said with all the dignity I could muster, "that money is mine because I earned it working for 40 years as a teacher. That house is mine because I paid for it with the sweat of my brow alongside my husband. And my life is not over just because you want it to be. I hung up the phone and realized I was no longer afraid. I was angry, determined, and had something that Richard, Laura, and Diane had completely underestimated: the will of a 70-year-old woman who had decided to fight for her freedom. The next day, Letitia's article was published on the front page of the local newspaper with the headline, "70-year-old grandmother escapes in the dead of night to avoid forced institutionalization planned by family." The story included photographs of the forged documents, transcripts of the recordings, and my full testimony. Mrs. Gable woke me up that morning with the newspaper in her hands and a smile I hadn't seen in years. "Helen, the whole city is talking about your story. The newspaper's phone has been ringing off the hook with people who want to support you." Sure enough, by 9 in the morning, I had already received calls from 3 local radio stations asking for interviews, 2 senior rights organizations offering free legal support, and surprisingly, 6 people who had lived through similar situations with their own families. "You're not alone in this." A woman named Clara, whose son had tried something similar 2 years ago, told me, "When I saw your story in the paper, I knew I had to call you. What you're doing is brave and necessary." But not all the reactions were positive. At 10 in the morning, Oscar called me with worrying news. "Helen, Richard has hired a very aggressive lawyer named Fabian Torres. They have already filed a countersuit claiming that you are mentally incompetent and a danger to yourself. They are also seeking a court order to force you to undergo a psychiatric evaluation." My stomach sank. I knew Richard wouldn't give up easily, but I didn't expect him to counterattack so quickly. "Furthermore," Oscar continued, "they have contacted all the local media with their version of the story. They are saying you are suffering from paranoia and delusions, and that the newspaper article is a product of your mental confusion. It was exactly the tactic I had feared. Richard was using my own bravery against me, saying that the fact I had spoken publicly proved I was mentally unstable." Mrs. Gable turned on the local noon news, and there was Richard, giving an impromptu press conference in front of his house. He was wearing a dark suit and had a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern. "My mother-in-law, whom I love as if she were my own mother, is going through a severe psychotic episode," he said, looking directly at the camera. "For months, we have noticed signs of mental deterioration, forgetfulness, paranoia, baseless accusations against the family that loves her." Next to him was Laura, her eyes red, a tissue in her hand. "My mom has always been a strong and independent woman," she sobbed convincingly. "To see her like this, making up stories about us, accusing us of terrible things, is devastating. We just want her to get the medical help she needs." Their performance was so believable that for a moment I wondered if anyone who didn't know the real facts could believe them. Richard continued, "The documents my mother-in-law has presented as evidence are misinterpretations of normal conversations about future medical care. Any responsible family discusses these options when a loved one reaches a certain age. There was never any plan to institutionalize her against her will." The lie was so elaborate and presented with such conviction that I understood why they had managed to deceive Dr. Evans. The interview ended with Richard making a direct appeal. "Helen, if you are watching this, please come home. We love you, we miss you, and we just want to help you. You don't have to live with this paranoia and confusion. There are treatments that can help you feel better." It was a masterstroke of public manipulation, painting himself as the loving and concerned son-in-law while portraying me as a delusional old woman. An hour later, my phone began to ring with calls from unknown numbers. Some were journalists asking for my response to Richard's statements, but others were people who had seen the press conference and now doubted my version of events. "Ma'am, is it true that you're sick?" one woman asked. "Your son-in-law seemed very sincere on television." Each call was like a stab, sowing doubt about my sanity in the public's mind. Mrs. Gable found me crying in the kitchen that afternoon. "I can't take this," I told her. "They are so convincing that even I am starting to doubt my own memory." Mrs. Gable sat next to me and took my hands in hers. "Helen, look at me. You are not crazy. You are not confused. You have solid evidence of what happened, and thousands of people support you. You can't let them convince you that the reality you lived is not real." That night, Claire sent me a text message that broke my heart. "Grandma, I don't know what to believe. Dad and Mom are saying you're very sick, and that the photos I took are of documents you misinterpreted. They say you manipulated me into stealing private documents. I'm confused and scared." Richard had achieved what he wanted, to sow doubt even in the mind of my own granddaughter. I replied immediately, "Claire, I understand your confusion, but I want you to remember something. The grandmother you have known since you were little, who helped you with your homework for years, who knows all your secrets and has never lied to you, does she seem like a person who would invent such an elaborate story? Or does it seem more likely that the adults who have been lying about small things for months are also lying about this?" The message came back an hour later. "Grandma, you're right. When I think about it that way, it doesn't make sense that you would make all this up. But Dad says that when older people get sick, sometimes they don't even know they're making things up." Richard had done his homework, using the natural fears about aging to undermine Claire's trust in me. "Claire, do you remember the game we used to play when you were little? I would ask you what mattered most to me in the world, and you would always say the truth and family. Do you think that has changed? Do you think I would suddenly decide to destroy my own family with lies?" There was a long pause before her reply. "No, Grandma, that doesn't make sense. But then, why are Dad and Mom saying these things? Because they have a lot to lose if the truth comes out, my love. Richard could go to jail for forging medical documents. Your mom could lose her reputation and her job. And they would both lose access to my money, which is what they wanted from the beginning." Claire didn't reply immediately, but when she did, her message filled me with hope. "Grandma, I think I need to see more evidence for myself. Can you send me the recordings you have?" That night, I sent Claire the recordings of Richard's threats and my conversation with Diane. I also sent her copies of all the documents Oscar had gathered, including the bank reports showing Richard's unauthorized access attempts. I knew it was risky to involve Claire so deeply, but I also knew she was an intelligent young woman who deserved to know the truth about her parents. At 2 a.m, I received a message that made me cry with relief. "Grandma," I listened to the recordings. "Dad's voice when he threatens you is the same voice he uses with me when he's really angry, not the fake voice he puts on in public. And I recognize Grandma Diane's laugh when she says, 'You've already lived your life.' I know it's real. It's all real. I'm so sorry for doubting you. My granddaughter had chosen truth over comfort, and that gave me the strength I needed to keep fighting. Claire, you don't have to apologize. They are very good at manipulating, and it's natural that you had doubts. But now that you know the truth, I need you to be very careful. Don't let them know you believe me. Your safety is more important than anything." Claire assured me she understood, and we agreed on a secret code to communicate. She would send me pictures of flowers when it was safe to talk, and pictures of clouds when there was danger. The next day, Claire sent me a picture of red roses, followed by a message that would change everything. "Grandma, Dad, and Grandma Diane are going to do something tomorrow. I heard them say they're bringing a different doctor to the house. Someone who is going to say you have to be admitted immediately for your own safety. They're also going to contact the police to report you as a lost and confused senior. You have to be prepared." The information Claire had sent me filled me with a mix of panic and determination. Richard and Diane had decided to escalate their strategy, and I knew I had less than 24 hours to prepare for their next attack. I immediately called Oscar, who scheduled a meeting in his office first thing in the morning. "Helen, what they are planning is technically legal if they get the right court order," he explained as he looked up legal codes on his computer. "But we have advantages they don't know about." Oscar had been working all night, preparing a counter-strategy. "First, I've already hired an independent psychiatrist, Dr. Owen Reed, to evaluate you this afternoon. He is a respected professional with no connections to your family, and his evaluations are considered impartial by all the state courts. He explained that this evaluation would be crucial to prove my mental competence. Second, I've gotten an emergency hearing with Judge Wallace for tomorrow at 10 in the morning, before they can present their own case. And third," Oscar continued with a smile, "my private investigator found some very interesting information about Dr. Evans. It turns out he has gambling debts of over $50,000, and Richard lent him $20,000 2 months ago. We have the bank records that prove the payment. This explained why the doctor had been willing to forge my medical documents. Richard had bought him, taking advantage of his financial desperation. The evaluation with Dr. Reed that afternoon was exhaustive but reassuring. For 3 hours, he asked me questions about my personal history, my finances, my medications, and my understanding of the current situation. He also conducted standard cognitive tests, remembering lists of words, solving math problems, identifying dates and places. Mrs. Reed, he told me at the end, not only are you completely mentally competent, but you demonstrate a clarity and mental acuity above average for any age. That night, Claire sent me a series of messages that confirmed my worst fears, but also gave me valuable information. Grandma, the new doctor arrived this afternoon. He's an older man, very serious, and Dad was showing him papers and talking in a low voice. I heard Dad tell him that you had violent episodes and had threatened the family. Richard's lies were becoming more elaborate and dangerous. Grandma Diane also came with a suitcase. She's going to stay here until the problem is resolved, as she says. The most disturbing part came in the next message. Grandma, I found something terrible on Dad's phone. He left his phone on the table while he was in the shower, and I saw messages with someone named Dr. Harrison. Dad wrote, I need you to declare her incompetent no matter what she's like when you see her. The extra payment we discussed will be in your account tomorrow. The doctor replied, Understood. I have experience handling these difficult cases. My blood ran cold. Richard had found a corrupt doctor willing to falsify a psychiatric evaluation in exchange for money. Claire continued, But there's something else, Grandma. Mom is acting very strange. Last night I heard her crying in her room, and when Grandma Diane asked what was wrong, Mom said she wasn't sure if this was the right thing to do anymore. Grandma Diane yelled at her and told her it was too late for regrets, that they had come too far to turn back now. There was a crack in the alliance, and Laura was beginning to question what they were doing. I spent the night at Mrs. Gable's house, preparing for what I knew would be the most important day of this battle. Oscar had coordinated everything perfectly. At 8 in the morning, I would voluntarily present myself at the courthouse with my own psychiatric evaluation and all the evidence of the conspiracy. At 10, we would have the hearing with Judge Wallace, and before Richard could present his own case, we would have already exposed his lies and corruption. The morning came, cold and gray, perfect for the drama that was about to unfold. Mrs. Gable accompanied me to the courthouse, where we met Oscar and Dr. Reed. Helen, Oscar said as we walked towards the entrance, remember that today you are not just fighting for your freedom. You are fighting for your dignity, for your right to age with respect, and you are sending a message to other abusers that seniors are not easy victims. When we entered the courtroom, I was surprised to see it was full of people. There were journalists, representatives from senior rights organizations, and several people who had read my story and come to support me. On the opposite side, I saw Richard with his lawyer Fabian, both dressed in black and with somber expressions. Laura was there too, but she looked pale and nervous, avoiding my gaze. Judge Wallace called the court to order and began by reviewing all the documents we had submitted. Mr. Torres, she said to Richard's lawyer, I see that you allege that Mrs. Reed is mentally incompetent, but she has voluntarily presented herself today with an independent psychiatric evaluation that completely contradicts your claims. How do you explain this discrepancy? Fabian stood up and began his argument. Your Honor, it is precisely the nature of certain mental conditions that patients can appear lucid temporarily, especially when in a controlled environment like a doctor's office. My client has evidence that the lady has had violent and threatening episodes that demonstrate she is a danger. It was a clever tactic, but Oscar was prepared for it. Your Honor, Oscar intervened. I would like to present evidence that the doctor evaluating my client for the other party received a payment of $20,000 from Mr. Richard Martinez 2 days before conducting said evaluation. We also have text messages that prove Mr. Conducting. Martinez specifically instructed the doctor to declare my client incompetent regardless of her actual mental state. A murmur went through the courtroom as Oscar presented the screenshots Claire had obtained. Richard's face turned red when he saw that we had the messages from his phone. Fabian asked for a recess to consult with his client, but Judge Wallace denied the request. I want to hear exactly how you explain these messages before we proceed. Richard urgently whispered something in his lawyer's ear, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, Fabian said after a moment, my client denies sending those messages. It's possible his phone was compromised, or that the messages were forged. But Oscar had one more card to play. Your Honor, I would like to call my client's granddaughter, Claire Martinez, to testify. She can confirm that she herself took these screenshots from her father's phone. Claire entered the courtroom, accompanied by a court-appointed social worker. She looked small and nervous, but when she looked at me, I saw determination in her eyes. Richard tried to smile at her, but Claire avoided his gaze. Under oath, Claire testified that she had seen the messages on Richard's phone and had taken the photos on her own. Did anyone ask you to do this? Oscar asked her. No, sir. I did it because I knew what my parents were planning to do to my grandmother was wrong. The crucial question came when Oscar asked Claire to describe Richard's behavior at home. Have you ever seen your grandmother be violent or threatening, as your father alleges? Claire took a deep breath and answered in a clear voice. No, sir. My grandmother has never been violent. But I have seen my dad threaten her over the phone, and I have heard conversations where he and my other grandmother were planning things against her. Richard jumped out of his seat, shouting, She's lying. She's been manipulated. But the judge ordered him to sit down and be silent. Finally, Oscar presented the evidence of the bribery of Dr. Evans and the forgery of medical documents. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of a confused old woman, but a case of criminal conspiracy to deprive a competent person of her liberty and seize her assets. The judge reviewed all the documents in silence for several minutes that felt like hours. I have seen enough, Judge Wallace finally declared. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Helen Reed is in full possession of her mental faculties and has been the victim of a conspiracy to deprive her of her rights. I order that the protection order against Mr. Richard Martinez, Mrs. Laura Sandoval, and Mrs. Diane Martinez be maintained. Furthermore, I am ordering an immediate criminal investigation into the allegations of document forgery, bribery, and conspiracy. The gavel fell, and I knew I had won the first real battle. When Judge Wallace delivered her verdict, I felt as if a gigantic weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had won, but Richard's glare from across the courtroom told me this was far from over. As we were leaving the courthouse, I saw Fabian speaking urgently with Richard, who had his hands clenched into fists and his jaw tight. Laura remained seated in her chair, her head in her hands, sobbing silently. Claire came up to me and hugged me tightly. Grandma, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. I'm sorry I didn't realize what Mom and Dad were doing sooner. My precious girl, I said, stroking her hair. You have nothing to be sorry for. You were the bravest of all of us. Without your help, I never would have been able to prove the truth. The court's social worker explained that Claire could stay with me temporarily while the family situation was investigated, but that eventually, decisions would have to be made about her custody. For now, he said, the important thing is that you are both safe. Oscar accompanied me to give a statement to the police about the criminal charges. The detective in charge of the case, an older man named Detective Miller, listened attentively as I recounted the whole story one more time. Mrs. Reed, he said when I finished, in my 20 years of service, I've seen many cases of elder abuse, but few with as much documented evidence as yours. Mr. Richard Martinez is going to face very serious charges. He explained that Richard could be charged with conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, document forgery, bribery, and elder abuse charges that, combined, could result in a sentence of up to 15 years in prison. 3 days later, Richard was arrested at his workplace. The local news covered the arrest, and the image of Richard in handcuffs being led out of his insurance office went viral on social media. Dr. Evans was also arrested and had his medical license immediately suspended. Dr. Harrison, who had accepted the bribe to falsify my psychiatric evaluation, faced similar charges and an investigation by the state medical board. Diane, Richard's mother, was questioned but not arrested, although she was forbidden to contact me under any circumstances. However, I received a call from her a week after Richard's arrest. Her voice no longer had its former arrogance. It sounded defeated and bitter. This is your fault, Helen. You destroyed my son and my family because of your selfishness. Her twisted logic amazed me even after everything that had happened. Diane, I replied with a calm that surprised me. Your son destroyed himself when he chose to steal and lie. I only defended myself. She muttered something about revenge before hanging up, but I no longer cared about her empty threats. Richard was in jail awaiting trial, Dr. Evans had lost his career, and I had full control of my life again. The situation with Laura was more complicated and painful. For the first 2 weeks after the trial, I heard nothing from her. Claire told me that her mother had temporarily moved in with a friend because she couldn't bear to be in the house where they had planned my kidnapping. Mom cries a lot, Claire told me one afternoon as we had tea at Mrs. Gable's house. I think she really realizes what she did, but she doesn't know how to apologize. A month after the trial, Laura appeared at Mrs. Gable's door on a rainy afternoon. She looked haggard, with deep dark circles under her eyes and her hair unkempt. Mrs. Gable asked if I wanted to see her, and after hesitating, I decided I did. Laura sat across from me on Mrs. Gable's sofa, and for several minutes, neither of us said anything. Finally, she broke the silence. Mom, I don't know where to begin. You could start by explaining how my own daughter, the child I carried in my womb for 9 months, whom I raised with love and sacrifice, could sign papers to lock me up as if I were a dangerous animal, I said. My voice came out harsher than I intended, but the words needed to be said. Laura began to cry, but I had cried too much over the last few months to feel immediate sympathy. Richard convinced me it was for the best, she whispered through her tears. He said you were deteriorating, that it was dangerous to leave you alone, that the assisted living facility was like a 5-star hotel. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I swear I didn't. Her explanation sounded pathetic even to herself. And the money, Laura? Did Richard also convince you that you needed my pension and my savings? Laura covered her face with her hands. We were in financial trouble, Mom. Richard lost a lot of money in bad investments, and Claire's college cost so much. I thought maybe you could help us, but Richard said you would never agree voluntarily. The truth behind the whole conspiracy was finally coming out. It wasn't just malice, but also financial desperation and Richard's toxic influence. Laura, I said after a long silence, for 70 years I have faced money problems, family crises, illnesses, and the death of your father. Never, not once, did I consider betraying my family to solve my problems. If you had come to me honestly, if you had explained the situation, we would have found a solution together. But you chose lies, manipulation, and abuse. Laura's tears intensified. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what we did is unforgivable. But you are my mother, and I can't live without you in my life. Her words hurt me, because I recognized genuine love mixed with guilt and regret. But I also recognized that the damage caused was deep and could not be easily repaired. Forgiveness, I finally told her, is not something that can be requested. It is something that is earned with time, honesty, and real change. Richard is going to jail for what he did, and you will have to live with the consequences of your decisions. If you really want a chance to rebuild our relationship, you will have to prove that you have changed, not just with words, but with actions. Claire, who had been living with me since the trial, decided to stay with me permanently. Grandma, she told me one night as she was studying for her final exams, with you, I feel safe. I know you would never lie to me or betray me for money. The legal custody was relatively simple. Laura did not fight my petition, and Claire was already 17, which meant her opinion carried a lot of weight in the court's decision. 6 months after the trial, Richard was sentenced to 12 years in prison after pleading guilty to all charges. Dr. Evans received 5 years and permanently lost his medical license. During the sentencing hearing, I had the opportunity to give a victim impact statement. I looked directly at Richard as I spoke. You not only tried to steal my money and my freedom, you tried to steal my dignity, my autonomy, and my right to age with respect. But you failed, because you underestimated the strength of a woman who has lived 70 years learning to fight for what is right. With the money I recovered and the finally authorized sale of my old house, I bought a small but comfortable house near Claire's school. It had a garden where I planted tomatoes, roses, and aromatic herbs. Every morning, as I watered my plants, I reflected on how my life had changed. For months, I had lived feeling like a burden, like a problem that others had to solve. Now I understood that I had always had power. I had only allowed others to make me believe otherwise. Claire flourished in our new home. Her grades improved, she got her smile back, and she began to talk about her dreams of studying law to help other people like my grandma. We established a pleasant routine. We had breakfast together before she went to school. I worked in my garden or read while she studied, and in the afternoons, we would cook and talk about our days. Laura began to visit us once a week, always asking for permission first and respecting any boundaries I set. Slowly, very slowly, we began to rebuild something resembling a relationship. She had started therapy to understand how she had allowed Richard to manipulate her, and she was working 2 jobs to pay off the debts he had left her. "I'm learning to be the mother I should have always been," she told me during one of her visits. A year after the trial, I received a call from Letitia, the journalist who had written my original story. "Mrs. Reed, would you like to write a book about your experience? We have received hundreds of letters from people who want to know more details of your story, and I think it could help many other people in similar situations." The idea intrigued me. For months, seniors had been contacting me for advice on how to protect themselves from family abuse. I began writing my memoirs that same month. Every day, after Claire left for school, I would sit at my new desk and remember every detail of my experience. Writing was cathartic, but also painful. Reliving the betrayal, the fear, and the sense of helplessness was not easy. But also remembering my strength, my determination, and my eventual victory filled me with pride. The book was published 2 years later, with the title I Am Not Crazy, a grandmother's story of refusing to be a victim. It became an immediate success, not only because the story was dramatic, but because it resonated with thousands of seniors who had faced similar situations. I began to receive invitations to speak at conferences, community centers, and universities about the rights of the elderly. During one of my talks, an 80-year-old woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Reed," she told me, "after hearing your story, I found the courage to confront my son about the money he has been taking from my bank account without permission. Your story saved me." Moments like that reminded me why it had been important to fight, not just for myself, but for all the seniors who deserve to age with dignity and respect. Claire graduated from high school with honors and received a full scholarship to study law at the state university. "Grandma," she told me the night before she left for college, "I want you to know that you taught me what it means to be strong. Not the kind of strength that shouts and threatens, but the kind of strength that stands firm in the truth, no matter how many people try to convince you that you're wrong." Her words filled me with a pride I hadn't felt in years. Today, 3 years after my nighttime escape, I live a full and independent life. I am 73 years old. I manage my own money, I make my own decisions, and no one tells me what to do or where to live. My garden is flourishing. My house is full of life and laughter when Claire comes to visit during the holidays, and I have a network of friends and supporters that extends across the country. Laura and I have rebuilt a careful but genuine relationship. She will never be the daughter she was before Richard poisoned her against me, but she has become a woman who acknowledges her mistakes and works every day to be better. "Mom," she told me during her last visit, "I know I can never fully repair the damage I did to you, but I want you to know that I admire the strong woman you always were, and that I had to hurt you to be able to see her clearly." Richard is serving his sentence in a state prison, and according to Claire, who maintains minimal contact with him, he has shown no real remorse for his actions. He continues to blame me for destroying his family and maintains that he was only trying to take care of me. Diane moved to another state after the trial, and I have not heard from her since, which is exactly how I prefer it. Every morning, when I wake up in my own house, in my own bed, and see the sun coming through the windows that I chose, I remember that night when I escaped through the window with only a suitcase and a heart full of determination. That night changed my life not because I escaped my captors, but because I remembered who I really was. Helen Reed, a 70-year-old woman who had survived wars, poverty, loss, and betrayal, and who was not going to let anyone steal her dignity. The story that began with a whispered phone conversation in the dark ended with an elderly woman who reclaimed not only her freedom but also her voice. And that voice is now used to protect others, to educate about elder abuse, and to remind the world that age does not make us victims unless we allow it. I never went back to that house where they treated me like a prisoner. I will never again allow anyone to make me feel like a burden. And I will never again remain silent when I see injustice, regardless of my age or circumstances. Because I learned that real strength comes not from young muscles or infinite energy, but from accumulated wisdom and the refusal to surrender in the face of adversity. That night, when I climbed out the window to freedom, I didn't know I was writing the first chapter of the bravest part of my life. Now, every day is a new page in that story of resistance, dignity, and the beautiful truth that it is never too late to fight for what is right. 5 years have passed since that dawn when fear woke me up and courage made me walk towards freedom. I write these final lines at my desk, the same one where every morning I read the letters that arrive from women all over the continent, telling me their own stories of resistance. Some have managed to escape situations similar to mine. Others are still fighting, but all have found in my experience a spark of hope that tells them it is possible to win. Claire graduated from law school last month. I saw her walk across that stage in her cap and gown and felt my heart expand with pride. During her speech as the valedictorian of her class, she spoke about justice not as an abstract concept, but as something personal and urgent. "My grandmother taught me that the truth always finds a way," she said, looking at me from the podium, "but only if we have the courage to open the door for it." She now works at a firm specializing in senior rights, and she tells me that every case reminds her why she chose this profession. The foundation I created with the profits from my book has helped more than 300 families resolve conflicts related to elder abuse. We not only provide free legal assistance, but also preventive education and support groups. Every month, I meet with a group of survivors at the community center and listen to stories that remind me that my experience was not unique, but my response to it was. Laura comes for lunch every Sunday. We have developed a new relationship built on painful but necessary honesty. She is no longer my little girl who needs protection, but an adult woman who must bear the consequences of terrible decisions. But she is also a mother who is raising her new baby, my grandson, Sebastian, with different values. "I want him to grow up knowing his strong grandmother," she told me as the little one played in my garden last week. "Richard will be released from prison next year." Claire asked me if I am afraid he will try to get revenge, but the truth is, he no longer provokes any strong emotion in me. He is simply a man who made wrong decisions and now lives with the consequences. His power over me died that night when I decided my freedom was worth more than my comfort. My house has become a refuge not only for me, but for other older women who need a safe place while they resolve their legal situations. The guest room is always occupied by some grandmother who is learning to reclaim her voice. Mrs. Gable, who is now 82, says my house feels like a sanctuary where women come to remember their own strength. The garden I planted that first year has spread throughout the backyard. Every spring I plant new varieties of flowers and vegetables because I discovered that creating new life is the best medicine against bitter memories. The roses I planted in memory of my husband are now a gigantic bush that perfumes the whole house, reminding me that true love never dies, it only transforms. Yesterday, I received a letter from a woman in Colombia whose son was trying to sell her house without her consent. She wrote that after reading my book, she confronted her family and sought legal help. "You taught me that being older doesn't mean being helpless," her letter ended. "Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to fight." These letters are my greatest treasure, more valuable than all the savings I protected from Richard, because they confirm that that night when I climbed out the window, I not only escaped to my own freedom, but I opened a path for other women to follow. I am 75 years old now. My hair is completely white, my hands show the lines of time, and my steps are a bit slower. But my mind is clear, my will is ironclad, and my voice is stronger than ever. Every morning I wake up grateful for another day of freedom, another day of dignity, another day of decisions that are mine alone. Sometimes, in the silent nights, I remember those months when I lived as a prisoner in my own daughter's house. I remember the feeling of helplessness, the humiliation of being treated like an object, the pain of family betrayal. But those memories no longer hurt me. They strengthen me. They remind me of where I came from and how much I have grown. Life taught me that true victory is not in taking revenge on those who hurt us, but in reclaiming the power we thought we had lost. My revenge against Richard was not sending him to prison. It was proving that his attempts to break me only made me stronger. Tonight, like every night for the past 5 years, I will lock my house with my own keys, turn off the lights when I decide, and go to bed in my own bed, knowing that tomorrow I will wake up free, and that freedom, won with tears, sweat, and unwavering determination, is the sweetest thing I have tasted in my 75 years of life. It is never too late to write a new chapter. It is never too late to say no more. And it is definitely never too late to discover that inside every seemingly frail grandmother lives a warrior who was just waiting for the right moment to awaken.